In this tutorial, we're going to look at how to create tileable texture files using Plaid fabrics. Despite the fact that they may seem challenging at first, Plaids are probably the easiest kind of things to tile. You just have to look for the pattern and recognize some of the lines, but it's not like some of the organic plain fabrics and things with some melange that can have a lot of shading and be very challenging. And there's a number of ways that you can go about tiling a plaid. We're going to look at some of my favorites. The most common is probably going to be in Photoshop. And when we open a file, usually because it's fabric, it's not going to be perfectly straight. There's going to be issues with it that we have to correct for. So typically when I start out with a fabric I'm going to tile, I'm going to look for a repeat that looks as clean as possible. So I've got a little bit of mess here. There's some things going on that will be difficult to tile. So probably the best repeat would be this one here. And I will use the marquee tool to draw a rectangle around it. Now you want to go further than it because we're going to have to go and skew this a little bit. Then what I'm going to do, and I could have done this first, was bring down some guides and align it with your check. We see how it's dipping here. We've got both directions and create a nice box. So we're going from blue to blue, so I'm including this blue and excluding the next one. The same thing here, this guide, because I'm including the blue on top, I need to exclude it at the bottom, so I need to move that guide. I think the snap to function is giving me some issues. And it's usually a pretty good idea to bring another one out into the middle of your plaid just in case. This looks like a pretty stable cloth, so it's not going to be too tough. So again, have to calibrate my monitor. Draw my box around and then go to Edit, Transform, Warp. And it's good to get in pretty close. And because I started my guide right on the line over here, what I want to do is drag this one up to match. You see it's dipping in the middle, so I have to go around. Oh, be careful not to skew it. And then down here, I'm going to drag this one up. Too high. The little box with the pixels is getting in my way. So now this looks fairly straight. It's pretty straight across here. It looks all right. Maybe I want to... and then hit enter. So again, the key is to get one complete repeat. Since I'm including this blue line, I'm going to exclude it on the other side. And since I'm including it on the top, I will exclude it at the bottom. Looks like I've got everything. So now I'm going to set... oh, I'm already set to guides. So when I draw my... I'm going to deselect and then draw a marquee tool and then image crop. There's a neat relatively new feature. I mean, I say relatively new, it could be a year old for now. By now it's you know, when you're in lockdown forever, time seems weird. But view, pattern preview. All of a sudden we've got this neat new tool. We had to define patterns and fill spaces before, but now in Photoshop we can just throw it out, and there's some little tiling issues that could be cleaned up. Let's go see if we can make that a little bit better. Just going to move this guide out of the way. This little spot here I don't like. And a couple ways to deal with it. One tool I really like is the patch tool. Oops. What just happened? I had to deselect first. So I'm just going to drag around this spot and then drag out till I find something else. And it's important to make the pattern See, I've got that diagonal twill thing going on, so I need to make sure I keep that intact. And zoom back out. Still little things here and there, but generally because it's a plaid and there's a lot going on, it's pretty forgiving. You can get away with not having to spend too much time with balancing colors and things. And then the last thing that I'll do is, because we've started from one edge of the plaid and gone to the other edge, if I drop this straight into, say, Clo, the repeat's going to start on the side, and so I'm going to have a hard time balancing things like facings, lapels, and collars and making things symmetrical. So I'm just going to drag a guide out to the middle of it with, and before we do that, if your guides are set to anything other than pixels, like maybe you've got picas or something, set it to pixels because it's the most precise, and then drag a guide out, and it'll show you, see that little box with the pixels, when I put my line right in the middle of that repeat, I'm at 330.8. So another cool function in Photoshop is I'll go to Filter, Other, Offset, and I don't remember if it was exactly 330 or something else, so I got to do it again. 330, yeah, 330. So Filter, Other, Offset, minus 330.8. Doesn't like the 0.8. 331. What it's done is shifted this over, it's offset it so that the edge is in the middle of the repeat. And I'll show you why that's important later when we get into Clo and tile this out. But I'm just going to one last time check to make sure that it's tiling nicely. It's all right. Could be a little bit better in some areas, but for now, we'll leave it like that. So that's tiling in Photoshop. Playing with the warping and stuff was a bit of a pain, so there's another piece of software that I have just been starting to try out, and it's called Style 3D. Now, there's Style 3D is a whole suite of products. They've got a modeling product. They've got, we'll update later, thank you. But this is actually probably my favorite interface for doing checks because it makes it so much easier. Because these guys are about fabric and they understand about fabric twisting. Their crop tool is much easier to use than Photoshop. So I can just go in, drag this out, zoom in, and these points can be positioned individually. It's not constrained. I'm not pulling with warping tools and drawing boxes and stuff. So it's when you have a lot to do, like you don't notice just on this one, but if you've got tons to do, this is a real time saver. And then I can preview what that tiling looks like over here. We're seeing some artifacts, see this thing, so I'm going to want to correct that. Where is it? It's right there. Yeah. So with this box open, we also have some color smoothing algorithms. In this case, I want all that color modeling and variation, but if this was a plane, sometimes these things can get very difficult. Like this, I might have wanted to clean up. In fact, let's see if, see that's just clicking that pure color smooth. It took some of the variation away from it, and I don't want that much out, so I'm just going to dial this back a little bit. Until I find a nice balance. I'm still seeing that line, but now there's ways to do this with high pass filters and things in Photoshop, but that's really time consuming. I'm going to say this is probably and there's not a lot in their documentation about what these things do. I guess it's just play around with it until you find what you like. Let's actually did maybe a better job. think I like this one the best, so we'll stay with this one. And there, it's cropped and it's smoothed out, so slightly easier than Photoshop, but I'm not in the middle of my plaid. So what I could do, if my plaid is very stable, when I go and crop again, it gives me that same dimension of box, and I could just drag it over, assuming I don't have a lot of shift in my fabric, and then I just want to check it, and the repeat looks fairly decent, except now it's right in the middle, and so I would export. If I was going to make normal maps and displacement maps and things like that, I would do those now as well, but for the time being, for this demonstration, we just export the current map, and I would save it like that, and it's done. And then finally, one that I just discovered, and so just learning about, and I think it's fabulous, and the price is incredible when you're thinking about things like X-Tech software and things like this that are very expensive. Sure, this is not quite X-Tech's, but the indie license version of this is $37, and the full professional license is $100 for a permanent license. So that's real value. So we're going to create a tiling texture from an image. This sort of confused me at first because it's creating a square tile, which when you're creating a square out of a rectangle, I was like, how are we going to do that? But it actually works. Not sure how. So, ooh, that's not pretty. Something real odd is going on. But in any case, this is just a preview, and we haven't gone and played up with it. And what this software actually is looking for a pattern and repeating it. And so it's probably the fact that it's a little warped. So what we do is we go use the seed wizard. And yeah, since my fabric was warped, it's trying to correct it and straighten it automatically, but it's not quite there. And we see in the right-hand window the straightened version, and it's done a fairly decent job, but it's still a little bit off. And this is a little, I mean, it's easier than Photoshop, but it's not quite as easy to use as the Style 3D. But for the price, you can't complain. So I'm just going to go and look at, see my blue line is running way off over there. So let's, you're going to be careful that don't skew it the other direction. Keep it straight. Okay. Edge of the blue down into the middle of the blue, so we want to go and pull some of that out. And if you think you're fairly straight, I mean, we could get better, but for now, then you hit next, and then it's going to ask you, is this an appropriate repeat? And while it does look like an appropriate repeat, and it recognize the size of it, I'm just going to move it over to where I want it. Again, to have the middle of the repeat on that edge. And then I'll hit finish. And it generates. So there you have 3 different ways of tiling a plaid texture for use in your favorite modeling software. And next we're going to look at how I deal with plaids in Clo so that I have repeatable results and save a lot of time. So hope you'll join me for the next one.